Ladies, gentlemen, and expeditioners of some ages, Expedition 33 has been out for a few days now, and as people progress, getting further into the game, really diving into it, I am hearing a lot of talk about just how difficult this game is because of the parry system and how difficult it is to make certain choices along the way too. So today we're going to put something together that is so strong, even in Act 1 of the game, that you can't physically hit for higher damage numbers until you've reached Act 3. So we're basically skipping an entire act worth of power here. But as it is a specific build with some pretty specific requirements as far as the character and the gear, I wanted to start off with some more general tips to gain power and mistakes to avoid making to help make your journey either easier or just more enjoyable in general. For the most part, this will be centered right around the end of Act 1, maybe a little bit into early Act 2 section, so we won't go over super beginner stuff, but so you understand the context of the tips given, and then we'll talk about the build itself at the end. First up then, when using your Pictos and Lumina abilities, there are two main ways to think about it that will help you make your decisions. Pictos need to be used in fights to unlock their Lumina ability to be used as a passive. So of course, if there is a Pictos which has a Lumina ability that you want access to, you will need to win with it equipped 4 times, but outside of that, when you are looking to optimize your characters and your party for tougher specific fights like bosses, the best thing you can do is look at the actual stats that the physical Pictos offer. Yes, different Lumina abilities have different costs, and that will be a factor. It will come into play in your decisions, but I generally recommend focusing on the highest level relevant Pictos that you were going to use anyways for their ability for your proper equipment slots, and within that, specifically focusing on the stats that matter, such as speed or health if you aren't confident in parry or dodge timing, but speed is really the main one. Generally speaking, I run with 0 skill points put into vitality on my characters, and any actual bonus health that I have just comes from raw Pictos bonuses. Second, all enemy types are unique, and it pays off to treat them as such and respect these differences. They all have different attack patterns, sure, that's the obvious part, things like flying enemies versus grounded enemies as well, and the difference between free aim shots or not, but I'm talking a bit more in depth with things like elemental weaknesses or resistances that can dramatically change your damage output from fight to fight. Things like how some enemies will have shields, or recognizing when one specific enemy in a group is maybe even a support type enemy that is creating more shields for the allies, and the knowledge that bursting through that enemy would make the fight much easier afterwards. The simple way to play a game like this is to then just build something strong enough to crush every opponent, but the optimal way to play in general is to actually learn what different enemy types are like and adjust your combat choices based on your knowledge of them. For example, Maelle has a skill that completely obliterates all shield charges on an enemy and even gives her AP for each shield destroyed. This skill is pretty doo-doo when an enemy doesn't have any shields, of course, but when they do have shields, especially when they have multiple shields, there's just not many better options to go with. Third then has to do with the friendly Nevrons. You will meet the first of these pretty early in the game, named Jar, right beside an expedition flag, and you will find others as you progress through the game further. These sort of white, untextured Nevrons who are actually willing to talk to you. They will ask you to find them something to maybe help them reach their true artistic glory and purpose, a little tiny side quest in the area. If you then bring this item back to them, you usually get a reward for doing it, you get some more dialogue, and then an option pops up in conversation to fight them. So, should you do it? Should you fight them? Should you kill them because they don't come back? Quite simply, no. They give relatively high experience numbers compared to other enemies in their respective areas, sure, but that's the bulk of the reward that you would get, and as we went over earlier, there's a very efficient XP farm that doesn't involve killing NPCs. So if you don't kill them, but instead just help them, you complete the quests and then move forwards, later on in the game, you will be rewarded with some extremely powerful equipment. So this is just a simple entry to say, hey, if they're willing to talk to you, maybe you shouldn't go full murder hobo aggression in their face. Next up, this is one that you may or may not be aware of already, potentially depending on your progress and how you like to play, but once you have more than 3 potential party members, once you have more than 3 members of the expedition to join you, you will have a reserve party. The maximum active party size is 3, so once you have more than that, you can't use them all at the same time, but that doesn't mean that they won't be relevant to the fight. If at any point in combat your active party all die and you would otherwise fail the fight, you get the option to bring in the reserve party, continuing the fight from where it was left off, and giving you a second second chance at success. And this is actually quite relevant to the build that we'll be talking about in a bit, but in a sort of backwards fashion. That's quite fun, and it's the main reason I wanted to bring this up here. But because you can remove party members at will, you can instead have only one single active main party member, the actual start of a fight party. And if that party member happens to then die or lose for whatever reason, you then have a full cavalry, a full 3-player reserve party to jump in afterwards and then fight normally. Then finally, this should be a pretty obvious one to any seasoned RPG players, especially turn-based RPGs, but if you are struggling and finding the game difficult, one of the simplest things you can do to make it easier is grind levels. Few things will give you more power than straight up over-leveling your opponents, and especially dramatically over-leveling your opponents. And this game does not stop you from doing so. If anything, it sort of encourages it. And I say that because they put an absolutely busted experience farm option in the game that you could do halfway through Act 1 and can get you easily to level 30 in maybe an hour once you find it and you start getting into it, including the time spent to learn the fights to begin with, which is the hidden gestural arena. Here it is on your world map. We talked about this in a lot more detail yesterday because it's a pretty big deal. It's on the left side of the second chunk of open world you gain access to after completing the Flying Waters zone. You can go in from the moment that you access this part of the open world, and inside of here is, as it claims, a hidden gestural arena. You can talk to the guy in the middle platform and he will offer you 4 options of fights. The top fighter is the easiest but gives the least experience. The bottom fighter is the hardest but gives the most experience, so take them in order from top to bottom until you are comfortable just fighting the hard one on repeat, and you will gain levels from this super quickly, especially if you actively use the Pictos that you get as reward from these fights, as all of these fights force you to play with only one character at a time, and the Pictos boost characters that are fighting alone, and again, this is going to be very relevant later. That said, all of that leads to our sort of main thing here today, which is a really solid early game build that you can get up and running to some stupid power levels even before finishing Act 1. This build can be put around literally any of the characters if you want to use them for it, but especially if you have a specific weapon, this is absolutely done best by Maelle at this stage of the game at least. And the idea is to make the other party members inactive, like we talked about with the reserve party system, so our active party member, our only active party member, is Maelle. But if you then lose the fight for whatever reason, the allies can then still come jumping out and you can treat the fight more normally with a full 3-player party. The ideas behind this then are forcing it so we always attack first in combat, giving ourselves a ton of bonuses to the first strike in combat, giving ourselves a bunch of buffs for fighting solo, and then you will hit the damage cap of 9,999 in Act 1 of the game. And while it's worth mentioning that you do get something later on that allows you to remove the damage cap, that is quite a good while away from here, like a whole act away. All that said, I will try to go through the important details while also being relatively quick and concise too, as we've already had a whole video up to this point. For the weapon, you want the Medallum weapon for Maelle, and this thing is absolutely busted because the level 4 skill is that you start combat in Virtuose stance, which is 200% damage as our initial buff here right at the start of combat, and this is a really solid starting point for a strong setup. You get this weapon by using Maelle and winning the final fight of the Gestural Arena, which is in the main story within this act. Or if you did use a different character for this, you've already done it and are past the point of no return, you can get this weapon again when you are able to finally challenge and defeat Golgra, the chief of the Gestural village, in a duel. But chances are slim of that happening before you reach Act 3 really, as you sort of need uncapped damage to make it reasonable. But this weapon is the sort of ace in the hole that makes Maelle the ideal candidate for this setup. As for skill points and skills, this is the most efficient possible route to the skills that I wanted. Flurry is your bread and butter, especially earlier on. It has 3 hits, which means that we can hit damage cap with 3 separate hits. This makes it better than a 1-hit skill that also hits damage cap anyways, as you'd be doing 3 times the damage, and this is usable at my current level on turn 1 as part of our main combo. The next major one here is Fencer's Flurry, which you can unlock as low as level 16, and this is just because it is reasonable damage that applies to all enemies. This is the skill that you want to use to open up any multi-target combat situations really, as you will hit every enemy for damage cap rather than only one enemy at a time. That said, the skill that you really want to aim for, the really busted one in this tree, especially for single target damage, is Sword Ballet at the bottom here. This does insane damage. The earliest level you can get this at is level 26, and you won't be able to use it on turn 1 until later in the game because it costs a full 9 AP. But for combat that lasts more than one turn, or if you are looking to bring this later into the game where you can get more AP generation on first turn and can end up with 9 AP, then this will become absolutely devastating. As far as attributes, I've gone pretty much fully into might to sort of lean into the meme of this being a one-shot build, and this is partially because we are using a Lumina ability that guarantees we go first at the start of combat regardless of our speed, so I don't view agility as important unless you expect combat to take more than one turn, because the vast majority of combats will be done in that first hit. If you wanted to be a bit more balanced and a bit less weighted towards just the first turn, you would want to instead turn a good deal of my might stat to be agility instead, as speed is just generally the most important and relevant stat outside of specifically trying to hit the damage cap, and our weapon has some agility scaling on it anyway, so it will still give you some damage. As for Pictos and Lumina effects, of the ones that I have found by the start of Act 2 and with only a handful of Color of Lumina applied to Maelle, so that it's not at all unattainable or unachievable amount of points, especially for the stage of the game, these are all the ones that I think are worth having in this setup for one reason or another, starting off with the really important ones. As for which of these to use as Pictos instead of just Lumina abilities, essentially whichever 3 on this list you have at the highest level that give speed or health. The most important ones here to have are Last Stand Critical, which gives you 100% crit chance when fighting alone, Empowering Last Stand, which gives you the powerful buff when fighting alone, Solo Fighter, which gives you 50% bonus damage when fighting alone, and all 3 of these specifically are rewards for beating up the bosses in the hidden gestural arena that we talked about earlier, and those are some of our largest power increases for this playstyle. On top of this, you could also use the other Last Stand Pictos as well. I don't have them as Luminous abilities here, but you can get bonus speed and you can get Shell for free when fighting alone too, but I don't have the Lumina points for that anyways. Past that, Augmented First Strike is 50% increased damage on the first hit per battle, and this comes from Francois in SKA's Nest, so it's sort of mandatory. Teamwork down here gives you 10% increased damage while all of your allies are alive, and I did test this to actually check, and this does apply if your main party is only Maelle, if it's only a single party member, as long as the other expedition members aren't dead. So this does work for a solo character build, and this Pictos comes from the Merchant in the Yellow Harvest optional zone from the Harvester's Hollow expedition flag. You want to head forwards and right towards a sloping rocky incline, go up this path and follow it around to find an expedition journal, but past that, if you go forward still, look up at the edge and you will find a rock that you can grapple to and find the Merchant. Beat the Merchant in a fight and he will sell you this Pictos from his hidden inventory. Then First Offensive, which is another 50% damage bonus on the first hit dealt, but you also take 50% more damage from the first hit taken, so risk reward on this one. But our goal is to one-shot enemies anyways, so this one comes from the Chromatic Abyss boss in the Abyss Cave, which is an optional zone accessed in the open world. This is a tough boss fight, so I recommend doing this as one of the later steps of this process, as you can obviously use all the other stuff that we have done before this point to make this fight in itself easier. On which note, the last main Lumina effect that I recommend is called First Strike. This is the one that makes sure that you are first in the turn order in starting combat no matter what. This allows me to run 0 speed on this character if I wanted to and still win most combats before I even have to consider avoiding or parrying an enemy's attack. This one is in the Stone Wave Cliffs zone before the end of Act 1. It is a mandatory story zone, but specifically after the first expedition flag of the area. You will find enemies like this that wield energy weapons. After the first one of them that you see, you want to climb up some ledges that are on the back right of the area, and the Pictos will be on the floor ahead of you. Outside of these then, I've also got Burning Shots, which is mostly just sort of a panic button, I guess. It gives me a chance to apply burn on free aim shots, and this is to help deal with shielded enemies, which of course have a negative effect on our starting off in Virtuose stance, as your first turn will be spent dealing with the shields. So we can then use this to light enemies on fire, in combination with the Swift Stride skill that you will get on Maelle in the path I showed you earlier, which will let you enter Virtuose stance when hitting a burning enemy. For a similar reason, we also have Marking Shots, just because sometimes we will be firing shots anyways. It's cheap and let us get bonus damage whenever we need to fire out some free aim shots anyways. Energizing Start 1 is just a nice free AP at the start of the turn, incredibly valuable, especially because you can stack it with the other Energizing Shots bonuses when you have them, but Energizing Shots 1 is essentially a free pickup once you unlock SKA as your mount in the overworld. It's just sitting out on the world map, really easy to pick up and mop up, no problem. Augmented attack then increases your base attack damage specifically by 50%, which actually makes them quite strong in this setup with the rest of what we have running anyways. Again, for any combat that lasts longer than one turn, or for when you have low AP, this will make your damage still absolutely nasty. And then we just have Dodger as well as Dead Energy too, because we just had some bonus Lumina points, and they're nice, cheap, easy ones that will always have at least some level of value. Put all of these things on then, and the game will become criminally easy. And if by some unholy mess of a situation Maelle loses and dies, you can then still have a full 3-member reserve party go in after her, all built completely with their own synergies, their own playstyles, and their own way, and by doing this, you will lose nothing by having Maelle be your front line in a solo build by herself, because the worst case scenario is you then have to fight with 3 party members who you can build normally. That just about does it for today then, everyone. A number of tips shared as well as some mistakes to avoid making as far as power is concerned in Expedition 33 at the end of Act 1, early Act 2 sort of section of the game. I hope you've all enjoyed this, and hopefully it will enhance your experience moving forward as well. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.